nothing your love can't do. And so I kiss the wave that leads me back to you.
If you have your Bibles, Genesis chapter 32 is where I'm going to direct you in just a little bit. And welcome. If you have not been with us for a while, we're in a series that I have entitled Kiss the Wave. It's a phrase taken from a quote of Charles Spurgeon, the great prince of preachers. During the 1850s, probably the most prominent, well-known pastor in the world. He preached at the Metropolitan Tabernacle in London, England. He spoke 13 times a week, if you can imagine that. Spoke to thousands and thousands of people, brought the gospel to thousands and thousands of lives, and he was well-respected, loved, and adored. When he passed away, 60,000 people attended his funeral. Another 100,000 lined the streets of London in mourning. And as successful as Spurgeon was, he also understood the pains and the struggles and the trials of life. He was subject to deep, profound periods of depression. When you study Spurgeon's life, you see that his wife, Susanna, feared for his life often in these dark times of depression, feared that he would be able to continue to teach and minister as God had called him to do. If you were aware of the news this week, we lost another pastor to depression and suicide this week. It's a prominent thing in ministry, and it's a prominent thing in the hearts and lives of so many people. Spurgeon understood that. He understood the constant pain of severe arthritis and gout. You throw on top of that after the birth of his twins, his wife was an invalid for 25 years of their marriage, and he had to care for her. So he understood difficulties, trials, and struggles, but he also had a biblical perspective of them. And that's where he came up with this quote, "I have learned to kiss the wave that throws me against the rock of ages." Spurgeon understood what Scripture teaches, that the deep places with God often are found in times of adversity and trial and struggle. We have been talking about the reality that waves will come. Nobody's immune. Everyone in this room has at one time or will in the future experience the crashing waves of trials and struggles and adversity. And we also understand, though, in our study that there's a time coming when those waves will stop. There will be calm seas. That's called heaven. John had a vision of the new heaven and the new earth, and what he saw was a sea of glass. No more stormy seas, no more trials, no more death, no more sorrow, no more struggles. But until then, the waves will come. In this world, we will have trials and tribulations. And a message that we need to hear in the midst of those waves crashing upon us is this: don't give up. Don't give up. And I share that because some of you probably came here today ready to quit. When you heard the words stage 4, you were devastated. You thought maybe there's no hope, no future, and you're ready to quit. Or when someone says, I don't love you anymore, and you know that this relationship that you have fought for and hoped would last is over. When you hear someone say, we're downsizing and your job has been terminated after years and years of employment faithfully to this company. When you hear your son has been arrested for drug possession, whatever it is, you can make up your own line, your own story. And when the waves crash upon you, every impulse, and I think naturally every impulse might be to give up. But I want to encourage you today, as I've been trying to do through this series, to not do that. Don't give up. And specifically today, what I want to encourage you to do is to keep fighting. Now, last week, if you were here, we dove into the book of Hebrews for a little bit. Specifically, the 11th chapter of Hebrews talks about this great cloud of witnesses who have gone before us, who had their own waves crash upon their lives. But they were faithful. They endured. They didn't quit. They kept running the race. And as a result of that, they are this book for us of faces and names and stories that encourage us, that remind us we, like them, can continue to run even though life is at times very difficult. The Hebrew writer says of that 11th chapter of Hebrews and those cloud of witnesses in chapter 12, verse 1, he says, "Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." And every one of us has a race. Every one of us has a path that we have been chosen to travel. Yours is different from mine, but we all have a race. And the race that we're running is not a sprint. What we need to understand, it's a marathon. And if you know anything about running, when you're running a marathon, you come to a point in that race, I think it's around the 22-mile mark, that you hit what's called the wall, where physically your body is shutting down, and so mentally you have to talk yourself through to the finish line. I like the Message paraphrase of chapter 12, verse 1 in Hebrews. Do you see what this means? All these pioneers who blazed the way, all these veterans cheering us on. It means we'd better get on with it, strip down, start running, and never quit. Next week, just a little preview, or next couple of weeks, I'll talk about keeping a right perspective. So if you're a whiner and complainer, you might want to stay home. Last week we looked at one of those figures from the cloud of witnesses. His name was Abram, later to be changed to Abraham. And his message to us in some really uncertain times in his life was keep believing, even when you can't see the big picture, even when life doesn't seem to make sense. You got all these puzzle pieces and you're trying to figure out how they all fit together, even when it seems there's no reason to hope. As he and Sarah were still waiting for a promised child, but they're looking at each other and they're not getting any younger. Keep believing, trust in God's character, not your circumstances. Circumstances change, but God's character does not. God is good, God is honest, God is true, God cannot lie. He will help you, He will see you through. Today we're going to look at the life of another one in those cloud of witnesses. His name is Jacob. But before we get there, let me tell you about a riveting story. It's one of the most riveting books that I've ever read. Maybe you have perused it yourself. It's called Deep Down Dark. It's the riveting story of 33 Chilean miners who were trapped 2.5 miles underground when a chunk of rock the size of the Empire State Building fell across the only way in and out of the mine, and they found themselves with a 2% chance of being rescued, entombed 2.5 miles deep for 69 days. And in that 69-day period of time, they came face to face, not just with themselves, but they came face to face with God. As the story is told of these miners, one of them said, as they realized they were trapped with nowhere to go, all the things they had left unsettled in their lives began to gather in their thoughts. Think about that. All of a sudden now, with now access to the top and change those things that had been unsettled. Now all those things are filling their minds. Things they should have done, words they should have spoken, embraces they should have had. One of the miners was a 54-year-old, 30-year veteran of mining who also happened to be a very devout Christian. 30 years of mining, experiencing other cave-ins, drove him to a very deep, profound, abiding relationship with God. His name was Jose Henriquez. And Jose Enriquez, as a Christian, knew that they were in a situation that was dire. Their only hope was God. And so the men did what any desperate man would do, even though they had made fun of Jose's faith prior. Now they come to him and they ask him to pray for them. And he said, I'd be happy to do that, but you will pray as I pray. In an act of humility, get on your knees and bow your heads. And as they did, he began to pray. He said, we aren't the best men, but Lord, have pity on us. It's interesting as the story is told of these men, when he spoke those words, we aren't the best men, they struck hard against several of those miners. Victor Sequoia knows that he drinks too much. Victor Zamora is too quick to anger. Pedro Cortez thinks about the poor father that he's been to his young daughter. He left the girl's mother and hasn't even taken the time to go see his little girl. Jose Enriquez continues to pray, Jesus Christ our Lord, let us enter the sacred throne of your grace. Consider this moment of difficulty of ours. We are sinners and we need you. We want you to make us stronger and help us in this hour of need. There's nothing we can humanly do without your help. We need you to take charge of this situation. Please, Lord, please take charge of this. As Enriquez concludes his prayer, the men ask Jose, what should we do now? And Jose tells them to humble themselves before God and openly, out loud, confess their sins. deep down dark in that Chilean mind, something interesting began to happen. A revival began to break out as one by one, these men begin to confess their sins to one another and to God. One of the miners prays, "Father, forgive me for the violence of my voice before my wife and children." Another miner prays, "Forgive me for abusing the temple of my body with drugs." Men begin to ask for forgiveness for the moments when they betrayed the women who loved them, and they ask God to guide their rescuers to where they are, ready to accept salvation and to begin new lives as better men. Day after day, as they were stuck down in the darkness, as the lamps one by one began to go out, as their batteries faded and they found themselves in utter darkness, Jose told them about the light of Jesus. They prayed from the depths of their souls, they worshiped with their spirits, and they cried out to God for help. Let me ask you, what is your deep down dark? And let me ask you this, in your moment of desperation, when you feel like there's no hope, will you give up or will you cry out to God? If you're here today and you find yourself in a deep down dark place, I want to encourage you, this is not the time to give up. This is the time to keep believing. This is the time to keep fighting. This is the time to cry out to God to rescue you. And here's a reality. The fastest way to see the sun is not to run west from it, but to run east through the darkness so that you can get to where the sun will rise. If you want to see the sun, you've got to embrace the darkness. You've got to run through the darkness to get to where God needs you to be. And who knows, your desperate moment might be the very place where you, like these 33 miners, meet God. That's what happened to this other voice from the cloud that we're going to look at today. His name is Jacob. Last week, as I shared, we studied the life of Abraham, who kept believing that God would give him a son, even though the Bible says that he was as good as dead. And yet he and Sarah hung on, hoping against hope, and one day, lo and behold, Sarah conceives, and a child is born, and they name him Isaac. And you know what Isaac means? It means laughter. You know what God was saying? I got the last laugh here. And so Isaac is born, and he grows, and he marries a woman named Rebekah, and they have a son, and his name is Jacob. And so Jacob is Isaac's son, Abraham's grandson, and Jacob is a twin, if you know the story. Many of you probably do. His brother Esau came out of the womb first, so he's literally the firstborn, and Jacob is grabbing the heel of his brother as he follows in birth. And these boys may have been twins, but man, they were very, very different in their lives in every way. Esau hunted and loved the outdoors, but Jacob preferred staying inside. And so, you can kind of imagine as you put yourself into this situation that Esau would go out hunting for the day and bring home his catch, and Jacob would be watching the cooking channel trying to figure out how he's going to prepare the meal. So take a guess which son was the favorite of Isaac. Yeah, you guessed right. That would be Esau. He was a man's man. And Rebekah, Isaac's wife, favored Jacob. In fact, when you study the life of Jacob, I think it would be safe to say that he was the Bible's first mama's boy. There was a big difference between Jacob and Esau. Esau may have had the brawn, but Jacob had the brains, and as we know in his story, he would use them to outwit and manipulate his brother. In fact, Jacob's name means grabber, deceiver, conniver, coercer. Can you imagine going through life and somebody says, "Hey, what's your name?" "Well, my name's Deceiver." Jacob's story begins in Genesis 25. It's the story of deception. It's a story of dishonesty. The first thing that he does is he convinces his older brother to sell him his birthright. Remember, he was the firstborn. And so he convinces him to sell it for a bowl of stew. Esau had been out hunting. He comes home. He's famished. He smells what Jacob has been cooking, and Jacob connives, deceives, coerces, convinces. I'll give you a bowl of stew to feed your hunger, but you've got to give me your birthright, and Esau does it. And if that wasn't enough, he then steals his brother's blessing as the firstborn in an act of trickery. And what's worse is his mother, Rebekah, is the one who put him up to it. You can read about it in Genesis chapter 27. Just understand that the paternal blessing was incredibly important in that day and age. It was a ritual in which the father would lay his hands on the son who was to carry out his legacy. And Jacob stole it by pretending to be Esau before his blind and aging father. Well, needless to say, you can imagine that when Esau finds out what happened to him, he's not a happy camper, and so he begins to hunt a different kind of game. It's called little brother. And Rebekah gets wind of what he's doing. Now remember, Jacob's not a fighter, that's Esau. Jacob is a runner. And so he does what he knows best with the encouragement of his mom. Mama gets wind and sends Jacob to her brother Laban. And so after a long journey, Jacob connects with Uncle Laban. He gets a job. He sees Rachel, this beautiful daughter of Laban, and asks for her hand in marriage. And Laban says, that's a good thing. Work for me 7 years. You can have her. And the Bible says that the 7 years were just like a blink of an eye to Jacob. So deep was his love for Rachel. So the 7 years come and go, and on the wedding night, Uncle Laban pulls a Jacob. He deceives Jacob by slipping his older daughter Leah between the sheets, unbeknownst to Jacob. And Jacob wakes up in the morning, he sees not Rachel, but he sees Leah beside him. And he's furious. But the story says that Laban talks him down and gets him to agree to work another 7 years to get Rachel. And this time promising no switcheroos, this is going to be a straight up deal. You can really have her after the next 7 years. And so Jacob continues to work for Laban, but in the process, as the story unfolds, he cons Laban out of a lot of his livestock and his wealth. He begins building his own wealth, not only by accumulating his own livestock, but also by embezzling the best of Laban's livestock. So there's lots of conniving, lots of conning, lots of grabbing, lots of deceiving. Don't play Monopoly with this family. I mean, there's just all kinds of this stuff going on. And Laban is furious. Jacob knows that he is going to be, and so Jacob heads out of town, gets a 3.5-day journey ahead of Laban. But finally, on that journey, he finds himself in some desperate moments. And here's what we know. When we all face desperate times, we have a tendency to fight or flight. Or some of you might prefer to freeze. You're either going to dig in and you're going to fight for what you feel is right, or you're going to run, you're going to flee, or maybe you're going to freeze and just stand there. Fighters strike back, flyers take off, they go in the different direction. And what did Jacob do with his desperate moment? Jacob didn't kiss the wave, Jacob ran from the wave. He runs from his angry uncle. But eventually, Laban catches up to him, and there's this confrontation that takes place between Jacob and Laban. And Laban basically says to Jacob, what's up? What are you doing? And in Genesis chapter 31, verse 31, you find the honest answer of Jacob. He says, I rushed away because I was afraid. So as you study the life of Jacob, you will see in his story that he runs from one bad situation after another, always of his own making, and he always hits the road. But this time it's a little different. Where would Jacob go? To keep running away from Laban, he had to run back towards Esau, and he knew that Esau was a fighter. So Jacob and Laban, when Laban finally catches up to Jacob, they reach this agreement. It's like drawing a line in the sand, and basically they say, listen, you stay on that side and I'll stay on this side, and everything's going to be fine. And all of a sudden, Jacob finds himself standing with nowhere to go. He is literally in no man's land. He can't go back this way because Laban drew the line. And he can't go this way because Esau is there. Ever felt that way? Running from friendship to friendship, running from relationship to relationship, running from conflict to conflict, running from one broken promise to another. There's no responsibility, there's no courage, there's no fighting, just running. So let me ask you, what do you do when you find yourself with nowhere to go? Well, maybe like Jacob, it's time for a little wrestling with God. It's time for you to come face to face with your Creator. It's time for you to come to terms with some of the issues in your life. And so Jacob hears that Esau is coming his way, and he's got 400 men with him. It doesn't look good because, remember, Esau's the fighter, Jacob's the mama's boy, he's the runner, but he's got no place to go now, and he is just wondering, what am I going to do? So what does he do? He splits his family up, sends them across the river, and he goes back to his camp, and he's all alone. I'm sure, like those miners, he finds himself in what I think you could call is a deep down dark place. It's time for a little soul searching. It's time for a little reality check. It's time to assess the mess he's made of his life and his family's life. And so that's where we come across this incredible event that takes place in Genesis chapter 32, where Jacob finds himself literally wrestling with God. Genesis 32, verse 22, during the night Jacob got up, took his 2 wives, his 2 servant wives, and his 11 sons, and crossed the Jabbok River with them. After taking them to the other side, he took over all his possessions. This left Jacob all alone in the camp. And a man came and wrestled with him until the dawn began to break. When the man saw that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of its socket. Then the man said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." "What is your name?" the man asked. He replied, "Jacob." "Your name will no longer be Jacob," the man told him. "From now on you will be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have won." "Please tell me your name," Jacob asked. "Why do you want to know my name?" the man replied. Then he blessed Jacob there. See, here's the deal. Jacob had finally reached the end of his running, hadn't he? He's got no place to go now. He's made a mess out of everything. He's burned every relationship. And the time was now for him to stay and fight for his family and fight for his life. And he realized he was wrestling with God, and in his desperation, he's not going to let go until he receives a blessing. Probably the first time he ever fought for anything in his life. And Jacob has given a new name, Israel. You know what Israel means? God fights. No more running. It's time for the beginning of a new life for Jacob. He faced the fight he had avoided all of his life, and the lesson he learned is that you can't run away from God. You just can't. There comes a time in all of our lives when we have to stand toe-to-toe, face-to-face with the God who created us and the God who knows everything about us. And Jacob comes to a point in his life where he finds himself both blessed and broken. First, he's blessed, a new name, a new identity. It's really a new opportunity, a new chance, a fresh start. He goes from being deceitful Jacob to chosen Israel. This is the moment, that desperate moment, where the scheming, the fear, and the running come to an end and the blessings begin. He would become the father of the nation of Israel, the 12 tribes from his loins. But he's also broken. He will walk with a limp the rest of his life to be reminded that you can't run from God. Maybe you will too. As you come face to face with God, you may limp, but I will guarantee you, you will not trade your encounter with God for anything in the world. Your limp will be your reminder of the blessing. You see, here's what I believe. Every good thing is possible. Scripture tells us that. All things are possible with God. It's one of the scriptures I have hanging in my home. It's a daily reminder to me that God is greater than any situation I find myself in. Every good thing is possible, but here's what I've come to find in my years of following Christ. It's possible, but not without a fight. Not without a fight. If you have the courage to stop running and decide that you're going to fight through the darkness, not give up until you reach the other side, you will discover God's power and God's presence in ways that you will not discover apart from those dark times. As you press on, as you hang in, as you continue to fight, as you keep believing, you might find a reconciled relationship. You might find a renewed purpose for your life. You might find a healing that you thought would never come, but you have to hold on to God and not let go. The quickest way through your desperation is to embrace it, to plunge into it, to kiss the wave and fight your way through the darkness. And here's what I have discovered. God doesn't want to leave you like you were. He doesn't want to leave you like you were before your addiction. He doesn't want to leave you like you were before your abuse. He doesn't want to leave you like you were before your affair. He doesn't want to leave you like you were before a relationship. He doesn't want to leave you the way you were before a financial disaster. He doesn't want to leave you the way you were before a diagnosis. He doesn't want to leave you the way you were before a failure. He wants to bless you, and He wants to introduce you to a whole new world of meaning and opportunity, but you have to stay and fight. You may come out with a limp, but it will all be worth it. I can remember my father, who was a pilot in World War II, flew B-17s. I asked him one day, I said, "Dad, would you do it all over again?" And he says, "You know, I wouldn't want to do it again, but I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world." Here's my message for you. Grab hold of God and don't let go. Across the world, and thousands of years after Jacob, thousands of feet under a Chilean mine, 33 men found themselves wrestling with God. They sat in utter darkness. Catch this. They sat in utter darkness until their souls were bathed in light. They wouldn't let go of God until they were blessed. Up top, a rescue operation was proceeding furiously. An elite drill team had gathered, and after 69 days, the miners were rescued. All the things that had been left unsettled in their lives began to gather in their thoughts. 69 days later, God gave them a second chance to settle all those things. How about you? If you find yourself in the deep down dark, you may actually be positioned to experience God's presence in deeper and more profound ways than you could ever imagine. So may I ask you, before I let you go today, what might be unsettled in your life? A fear that you've been running from? Conversation that you've been avoiding, a relationship you've been avoiding, an addiction that you've been battling, a relationship with God that you've been avoiding, or may even say a deeper relationship with God that you've been running from. Here's an idea. Instead of running away from the darkness, run into it. On the other side of the darkness, there's a sunrise. But you've got to press through. You've got to grab hold of God and not let go. Never give up. In the world's Words of Winston Churchill, never, 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 never give up. I'm not one for fancy altar calls. I don't see them in the Bible anywhere. I believe your relationship with God is a very personal thing. But I will say this to you today. If there's something unsettled in your life that needs to be settled, do not leave this place without making the decision to do just that. Settle it. Don't leave this place today unless you understand without any shadow of a doubt that your heart belongs to Jesus Christ, that you have bent your knee and given your life to the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. If you have not done that, man, I will be down front, Jimmy will be here, others. We would be honored to pray with you and help you to come to that place. If you have an estranged relationship with someone, get that relationship right. If fear is driving your life, give up your fear and keep believing in faith that God is in the midst of whatever it is you're dealing with. Don't give up. Keep fighting. Keep believing. Keep trusting. And who knows, out of your deep down dark moment, you'll see the light breaking through. And you'll see, like these miners, an opportunity to be reborn with a new life and new hope. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for each and every soul that's here, every life, so loved by you. And I simply ask, as I've already stated, that, Lord, you would speak to each of our hearts, and that we would not leave this place today with anything unsettled that needs to be made right. And so I pray over us, your children, may the Lord bless you and protect you. May the Lord smile on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord show you his favor and give you his peace. In Jesus' name.
There's nothing your love can't do, and so I kiss the wave that leads me back to you.